Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you happen to be watching this. I hope you're having a great day. As the title slide says, this is a bit of a hodgepodge. There's going to be some examples from Green, some do's and some don'ts. Much of this will probably be a repeat, and I apologize for that for those of you who have to listen to me spout off about what should happen or what shouldn't happen. But at the same time, I do think bits of review never hurt anyone, myself included. I have two goals. Look at the text ideas presented in some of Green's essays and discuss some writing tips based on Green's writing. And probably most of this is dealing with the second element of this. The text, I think, gives a couple of examples of claim data warrant that I want to talk about. But let's take a look. When one is writing, I think there are two goals: style and substance. And for those of you who don't know the Nature Boy Ric Flair, he was a world champion in, I think, every possible wrestling group, league, affiliation, whatever you want to call it. And he was famous for talking about styling and profiling. So there was a bit of substance to his showmanship, and there was a lot of style to how he sold everything. So let's talk about the do's from Green's work. And again, please understand, I say this a lot in class, and I'm just going to repeat it again. Green wrote all of these scripts for a podcast. They weren't necessarily designed at the beginning to be essays put in a book. And so some of the things he does work, some of those things work very well at a podcast level. They are not necessarily essays for a college comp class or a college history class or whatever. So please remember that. So when we pick and choose some of the things he's doing, remember he was writing for a podcast, not necessarily an essay for publication. In the introduction, he talks about when he reviewed books, the word I was never in the review. He imagined himself as a disinterested observer writing from the outside. I would argue that one should work to avoid using I. First of all, it leads to lazy wordiness. I think, I believe, I hope, I have shown that. All of those phrases are unnecessary. The reader should be able to infer your opinions from what you write. But again, work to avoid. It's not necessarily a hard and fast rule. There's a time to be disinterested, and there's a time when you have to be an interested observer. When you were writing the summary of a summary response, you should have been a disinterested observer writing from the outside. You were telling me what someone else said. However, the narrative, you're involved, so I is necessary. And this comparison and contrast essay that we're talking about right now, once again, the I is necessary for a really simple reason. It's about your experience, your expectations, and how you can compare them and contrast them with the fulfillment of those expectations. Next, have a clear thesis and follow it through. In the Anthropocene, there are only participants. He goes on to say, we are so much the dominant creature on this planet that we essentially decide which species live and die, or participants. As an individual, I don't feel that power. I can't decide whether a species lives or dies. I can't even get my kids to eat breakfast. In the daily grind of human life, there's a lawn to mow, soccer practices to drive to, and a mortgage to pay. Did he make his point? Did he follow through about being no disinterested observer? There are only participants. He can't decide which species lives or dies. Was that phrasing necessarily the best phrasing to make the point when he says we are the dominant creatures and we decide which species live or die? All of these activities in the daily grind of human life, moving, doing, all of those sorts of things indicate we're participating, but just not on the grand scale that Green talks about earlier. The point is, I don't know if he's following through on his thesis. It seems like the last half is we are kind of interested in something different than in the first half. Follow through on your thesis. I don't know if he's following through here. And maybe this should have been in the don'ts. I want you to have a clear thesis. I want you to follow it through. I don't know if Green is. So don't follow his example, but do this. Do have a clear thesis and do follow it through. Have some warrants and explanations. I think this is a wonderful paragraph. He finds the fact that we used a fake cave art to save real cave art as hopeful. He gives the data about how it happened, and then he explains why it creates the hope. We might have graffitied over the paintings. We might have kept visiting them until the black mold ate away at them entirely. We let them live by sealing them off. He has hope. It might be a rare example of having hope. It might be a rare time when humans have done the right thing, but he has hope. Do make connections to other works. He goes about, I find myself thinking of the Wordsworth poem, "The world is too much with us late and soon." Think about song lyrics, think about quotations, think about well known literature, think about references to popular television programs or movies. Always think about those sorts of things as you respond to any of the prompts. Making connections to other works is always a helpful way to go about creating connection with your reader, to getting your reader to want to keep reading. If we find something we connect to, we're going to go to the next paragraph at least. This, I think, is an important limitation to this expectation of fulfillment. When you're living in the middle of history, you never know what it means. You're living in the beginning of your college career. You may not necessarily know exactly what it means. But allow yourself, as you think about comparing and contrasting and expectations of fulfillment, to be surprised. Dig to find some surprise. Try to figure out why things happen. I have the Douglas Adams quotation up here. That quotation, I think, is important because they knew the answer, but they forgot why the answer fit. I think it's important here to recognize those limitations, to be honest, to find some sense of surprise. One of the reasons people read is to be surprised. I think one of the reasons people should write is also to be surprised. Challenge some prevailing orthodoxy. I believe that in most of my class periods I've used this example before, but I'm going to use it one more time. And first, let me back up here. Remember, I think we all somehow believe that because we have the internet, because we have smartwatches, because we have phones that are more powerful than the computers that put humans on the moon, we're somehow way superior to the humans who lived 100 years ago or 10,000 years ago. But the fact is, Humans of the past, whereas humans as we are, I think challenges that orthodoxy. That sentence challenges it. I believe I've used this example in class, but all of you have probably been told that the years you're experiencing or your high school years were the best years of your life. In my effort to challenge that orthodoxy, I try to remind you that if that is true, you all have 62 years of going downhill. And I would not wish 62 years of going downhill on my worst enemy. Think of ways to challenge the orthodoxy about college existence, college life, expectations of created in college from high school, the power of your memories as high school students, whatever it is. Think about ways to challenge the prevailing orthodoxy as you compare and contrast your expectations and your fulfillment. Some don'ts. Again, that the following the thesis perhaps should have been here as well, and the fact that Green doesn't follow it very well. Remember, I want you to follow the thesis. Let's look at a few other don'ts. Perhaps I'm the only one in the world who doesn't like this, and I think I'm going to be hypocritical because in a couple of presentations I probably have some questions strung together. Don't string the rhetorical questions together. I'm your audience for the grading portion. And I think at a real level, however, a rhetorical question should provoke focused thought. And if I've got a whole series of questions, that focus is going to be distracted, it's going to become diffused. Have the focus. One rhetorical question is more than enough. Next, remember that you're going to have to cite sources for specific stats. We talked about this one in class before, but 80% of humans are in urban areas. That stat, I don't think we need to cite that. I think that everybody can kind of know that. 75% for Canada geese. I don't think that that fits a common knowledge exception. And so if you're doing a stat like this, make sure that you're citing it. Green has an editor. We don't. Make sure that you find stats like that and give citations. Don't assume the reader knows the works you reference. And perhaps here I'm being a hypocrite because I have a series of questions. I don't think they're rhetorical, however. Do you know who Wordsworth is? Do you know that he was one of the Romantic poets in the late 1700s, early 1800s? Can you give any poems? Can you tell the title of this poem? Can you tell the next line? The world is too much with us, late and soon. Getting and spending, we lay waste our powers. Little we see in nature that is ours. Those sorts of questions, I think, are important. Don't assume in a world where people can isolate their likes and dislikes, and where people who love rap or hip hop are going to be sitting next to people who listen to only country or jazz or anything else, where people can be eccentric. Don't assume everybody knows your reference. Make sure you give enough context for your reference. Please make connections, use pop culture, use poetry, use television programs, use newspaper articles, use news events, whatever. But don't assume everybody knows everything that you know. Make sure you provide the context. Provide the details to let the reader make the connection. Don't go off on tangents. And I think this one's important when one assumes that everybody knows the context of a poem, knows the context of the quotation, or you assume that everybody's having the same experiences as you are. Everybody in your class is, everybody in your sections are college freshmen, or almost everybody. All of them are college students. And so we found memories of hands from up to 40,000 years ago, from Indonesia to Australia to Africa to the Americas. They remind us how different life was in the past. Amputations from frostbite were common. You see hand stencils with 3 or 4 fingers. We're talking about hand stencils. Life was difficult. If you've had fingers amputated because of frostbite, life is difficult. But then all of a sudden, a quarter of the women died in childbirth, 50% of the children did not live to age 5. And then we jump back, but the hand stencils also remind us. If the focus is on hand stencils, keep the focus on hand stencils. If your focus is about the Mount Marty parking lot, keep your focus on the Mount Marty parking lot. Don't all of a sudden jump to Marion Auditorium. Don't go off on tangents. There were 3 or 4 images in this presentation. They were all stolen from the web for educational purposes. Hope all of you have a good day. Hope to see all of you in class the next class period.